So speaking of the Power Five, that of course isn't the only conference that had its fair share of surprises as well. But let's go over not completely over to the East Coast. We won't do that yet, but we'll go to the great state of Texas. We'll go down to Fort Worth, Texas, more specifically, where we see TCU making a statement against one of the newcomers in the Big 12 Conference, and that is the Cougars of BYU. Now, for this particular line, the line for TCU and BYU right before kickoff, it was TCU -5. So Vegas believed TCU was going to win this game, but a lot of folks in Vegas thought this game was going to be a lot more competitive than what it actually was. And for BYU, it was certainly a wake-up call. But they got some work to do if they want to get to that next step as a program and ever reach the point where they can be in the upper echelons of the Big 12 Conference. And that's even with Oklahoma and Texas both leaving for the SEC at the conclusion of this season. Now, TCU, there will not be a repeat of them going to the college football playoff. Let's make no mistake about that. But for TCU, they played a very inspired performance. Their quarterback, Josh Hoover, he is a redshirt freshman. Now, he's played in certain spots this season. He's played in a couple of other games this year, but this was the first time that he was going to actually start. You know why he was making that start? It wasn't because of a coach's decision. Chandler Morris, the incumbent starter for TCU, he ended up spraining. Hang on, I have to see. He sprained his MCL in his left knee. Very serious knee injury. Very fortunate it's not torn. They might get him back towards the end of the season. So Josh Hoover came in. He threw one pass in 2022 that went for 2 yards. And then in 2023, he played sparingly in the Nicholls State game. He took over midway through the Iowa State game. But this is the first time that we're going to actually see Josh Hoover in meaningful action, given time to prepare as a starting quarterback. And this TCU coaching staff, the players, they rallied behind him, and they have spoken very highly of him before, during, and after the game. One thing that Coach Sonny Dykes always liked about Josh Hoover is that even when he was a backup, he always prepared like he was a starter. You love having that kind of person as your backup quarterback, because when you're the backup, it's easy to check out. It's easier to, maybe do a little bit of skimming to see what's could be looking at for better pastures in the transfer portal. Not this kid. He remained patient. He waited for the opportunity, and his time finally came. And let me tell you guys, he made the most out of his opportunity. Josh Hoover went off in this game against BYU. He ends up going 37 of 58. So he was slinging that thing around. Pause. He goes for 439. He threw for 4 touchdowns. He throws all of those touchdowns to different receivers. So he was doing a very good job of, getting folks involved and just being like a point guard, just being a good distributor. Didn't have to be the hero by any means. And he did his job. And the rest of the TCU squad did their job as well, holding BYU to just 11 points in this game. They held BYU to just 243 yards in this game. Multiple turnovers forced as well. Kevin Slovis, that kid, the former quarterback of USC, the former quarterback of, I believe he was also at Pitt. Oh no, he was at Pitt. He was at USC. Worst game of Kedon Slovis' career. 15 of 34, 152 yards, had an interception thrown, lost a fumble. His 75.8 quarterback rating, career low in 44 games. This is a guy that's played a lot of football at the college level, has a lot of experience. And they made him look silly. They bamboozled him. They flabbergasted him. Kedon Slovis, he was down horrendous. And that was a big reason why BYU got blown out in this game. Frankly, it was a complete performance by TCU. You know, when you're winning by 30 plus, it usually is because it is a complete performance. Offense clicking at a high level. TCU ended up with over 500. I think they ended up with over 550 yards in this game. They did. They got 584. I just did a little bit of a discount double check. One thing that I would say that wasn't perfect for TCU, they did have 7 penalties for 59 yards. So a little bit of cleanup that needs to be done there. But overall, a great performance for that TCU squad. And in order for TCU to remain relevant, I think Morris is going to have to continue to play at that level where not necessarily you got to go win them a game, but not be the reason why your team is losing. Because Morris is going to be expected to miss at least a month because of that injury. But is it one of those situations, and one that I'm really curious about following TCU moving forward? Because last year he hurt himself at the beginning of the year, and then Max Duggan ended up taking over. And by the time he was healthy towards the end of last year, Max Duggan already has entrenched himself as the quarterback of TCU. Now, Max Duggan was going to move on to the NFL because of what his college eligibility was. The question that I have is if the same things happens, because Josh Hoover, like we mentioned earlier, is a redshirt freshman. Do we see possibly Morris enter the transfer portal? Could be an interesting thing to watch moving forward. It makes you wonder. I don't have the answer for that. You can come with your own conclusions down in the comments section. So, biggest things to take away. We'll start with the winner, and then we'll move on to BYU. For TCU, this was a much-needed win for Dying Squad because TCU did end up coming into this game losing 2 in a row. They lost a heartbreaker to West Virginia. That was a close game. And then Iowa State didn't look good against Iowa State, but that's partially because of that Morris injury. They're back in their winning ways. They were on a 3-game winning streak before that. And the rest of their schedule, somewhat navigatable. They should be able to go bowling. I can see them. We'll see. Here's the schedule. Got Kansas State, Texas Tech, Baylor. I think Baylor's definitely a winnable game for TCU. Maybe they'll find a way to win 1 or 2 more games. For the other 4, TCU certainly looks like a team that can go bowling. But yeah, ever since that 12-0 regular season started last year, I mean, TCU has just been hovering at 500. Dykes trying to avoid falling back into irrelevancy. We'll see if Morris can recover. We're wishing for a speedy recovery. But we'll see also if Josh Hoover can prove that he can have like a Max Duggan type year and maybe entrench himself long-term as a starting quarterback. Not because Morris isn't good, but, you know, the best of trait is availability. And if you're not available, you're not going to be as likely to start. For BYU, we're going to have to continue to try to find ways to, you know, find some offense. BYU has struggled in that department. They came into the BYU game last in a 14-team Big 12 conference. They've only averaged 319 yards per game, and they might have actually been worse than that 319 average. They had less than 250 yards of total offense. So BYU is going to have to find a way to try to create some bigger plays. They have the weapons. I think they had the experience at quarterback in order to, try to get a spark on offense. But another rough trip for BYU up to Fort Worth. This was their first trip, by the way, for BYU since 2010 when they lost 31-3. Tough. It's very tough to be in a new conference. Definitely a learning curve for BYU, as well as the other teams that are indeed joining the Big 12. Houston, UCF, Cincinnati. Realizing that, it's a different learning curve than being in the American Conference. BYU being an independent school, so they might have been the most equipped, but at the same time, though, definitely tough. So what's going to happen next? BYU, they're at home. They're going to return back to Provo, Utah, but they're going to play just their second game ever against Texas Tech. Their only other meeting that they had was back in 1940. This is their first meeting since then. BYU going to have to play much better if they were going to take down Texas Tech. Texas Tech, I don't have in the top 25. I do have them close, somewhat close to being in the top 25, though. TCU, on the other hand, they play Saturday at Kansas State. We talked about it in the Any Given Saturday top 25 poll. It's a rematch of last year's Big 12 championship game. And while TCU will, and Kansas State to a degree too, not necessarily Kansas State, TCU is going to need some help to get back to that Big 12 championship game. What they can certainly do this upcoming weekend is I think they can thwart Kansas State's chances to go. Because if Kansas State loses another game in conference play, it's probably not going to be able to get done. Probably looking at Oklahoma and Texas going at this point, unless we see an upset. But TCU can at least start being a spoiler for Kansas State. Going to be interesting. Like I said, going to be real interesting. Last 5-6 games of the season. It's going to be a good one.